Hi guys, David here. I just got a package in from Gunsmith Don Williams. I wanted to show it to you. This is my high power. And before I get going, let's start talking about safety. To make lives last, put safety first. I just heard today that some man accidentally shot his son in their car when he was handling his pistol, and you guys that are new to firearms, I just want to make sure that you follow all the safety rules. Anytime you handle a firearm, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Always practice on keeping your trigger finger straight. Don't curl it into the trigger guard. Safety check a semi-automatic pistol. Drop the magazine. Open the chamber a couple of times. Make sure no rounds are popping out. Also open the chamber, lock it open, and actually look inside the chamber after you pull the slide open. Look in there and make sure there's no round in there. The reason for that is this is the extractor right here. The extractor has a metal claw on the end. The claw grabs the rim of the cartridge and pulls it out. If the claw is worn, damaged, or has a lot of gunk and dirt in there, it may not catch the rim of the extractor. Thus you can possibly close the slide on a chambered round and not know it's in there if you don't inspect the chamber, and it can fire and injure someone. Always make sure your firearm's pointed in a safe direction, no matter whether you know it's loaded or not. So this particular firearm I bought used online, and I actually bought it in November of 2010. I didn't like the finish on it. I thought I'd refinish it. I have a friend who's a gunsmith who does nice bluing. I took it over to him. He told me I'd take care of it. I said I wanted a polished finish, but please protect the Star of David that's roll marked on the frame. This is a surplus Israeli police high power. So the man said sure, he'd take care of it. 3 months later, I didn't hear from him. I called him up, see what's going on. Told me to be patient. I'm the fifth in line, so I kind of forgot about it and left it in his hands because I trust him. 10 more months go by, and I remembered I didn't have the pistol, so I called him up, see what's going on, and it turns out that he's having health problems. His wife has health problems, and he's going to have to stop his gunsmithing business. So he mailed it back to me. So I decided to, rather than work on the finish and possibly lose my roll marks, I decided to work on the trigger. This trigger has over 8 pounds of trigger pull. It's hard to be accurate with it. I probably some of the results I had on my scale were close to 9 pounds. So I have a friend, Dennis, who let me fire his high power, and he has a very smooth trigger. He bought it used. He said he never did any work on it, but his trigger pull is about 4 pounds. I did a lot of research. There's a great high power sub forum on the 1911 forum on the internet, and there's a lot of pistol smiths that are recommended. Cylinder and Slide does a lot of work on high powers. Don Williams is another, and I just chose Don Williams. I heard he had a great reputation. That's not to say that there's not other pistol smiths that have great reputations, but I just happened to draw lots, pick Don Williams, send it out to him, and this trigger pull he brought down to 4.5 pounds. I haven't tried it yet. Why don't we try it on the gauge? Well, this isn't a real trigger pull gauge. This is a fishing gauge, but it's a digital gauge, and I guess it's fairly accurate. You never get the same reading the whole time. Do we have battery power? There we go. Okay, let's see where we're at. Remember, this is upside down. Pulling gently. Gently. That was 4.8. Let's try it again. Maybe I'll do it so you guys can read it right side up. Four, 411, 414, 5, 5.8. That was 7 pounds 12 ounces. Let's try it horizontally. I'm going to hold the hook so it's near the end of the trigger. Okay, here we go, horizontal. That was 3 pounds 12 ounces. So you can see how erratic these gauges are. It depends where on the trigger you hold it. Are you holding it high on the trigger, it's going to be a higher poundage. You hold it less, it's going to have more leverage. So to get an average, you probably want to be near the middle. So I got it near the middle. I'm holding it in place with my index finger. Let's do it again. 2.7, 2.14, 3.1, 3.6, 3.12, 4. That broke right at 4 pounds. I gotta say, Mr. Williams did an excellent job. The trigger is nice and smooth. About these high powers, these were designed by John Browning. John Browning's one of the most well-known designers of firearms that ever was. He designed the 1911, and it's still in use today. Over 100 years later, it's a very popular firearm. And this design, design began in the 1920s. Mr. Browning could not use the 1911 design because he sold the rights to Colt. Colt was manufacturing the 1911 at the time. They had the rights to it. So the French approached the FN plant. It's a Fabrique Nationale plant in Herstal, Belgium. They wanted a design for their military that had more firepower than a revolver. Revolvers hold about 6 or 7 rounds. The French wanted something that could hold 10 rounds, and they wanted a powerful cartridge. Browning came up with this design, designed it for the 9mm Parabellum. The reason why it's referred to as a high power is because the magazine capacity is 12 rounds. I believe it's 12 rounds, correct me if I'm wrong. Plus you add a round in the chamber, that would be 12 plus 1 round. So it exceeded the requirements of the French Army. Unfortunately, Mr. Browning died of a heart attack in 1926, and a designer at the FN plant took over and finished the design, and eventually later on, after the patent of the 1911 ran out, he was able to use some of the 1911 concepts. So we don't know exactly what the Belgians incorporated into the design after Mr. Browning died. I don't think it's clear as to what is John M. Browning's designs and what are the FN designs. You'll find the FN, after their rights ran out, this pistol was manufactured and copied by other manufacturers. There's a manufacturer in, I believe, Brazil or Argentina, somewhere in South America, where they make an FM high power. That's F as in Frank, M as in Mary. And supposedly they bought the license to it, so their parts are interchangeable. There's other copies, such as the FEG made in Hungary. It's a copy of the high power. They didn't have rights to it, and those parts are not interchangeable. Also during the war, when the Belgians thought the Germans were going to overrun Belgium, they sent the plans for the high power to Canada. The John Inglis Company in Toronto took the plans and they started manufacturing high powers. They're a very collectible item. They sold them to the Chinese. They used them in the Canadian Army. And I don't believe those parts are interchangeable because I believe it's considered a reverse engineered product. The magazines might be interchangeable, but I'm not really sure about the other parts. The Germans eventually did overrun the FN plant in Belgium, and they had the plant manufacturing high powers for the German army. So the high powers were used on both sides of the war. And the plant workers in the FN plant weren't quite happy about working for the Germans, so it's said that the quality isn't quite as good as on the pre-war and the post-war product. This is a all steel frame, and it's considered heavy. It's not the type of pistol one person would buy for self-defense because it's a single action pistol. That means you cannot cock the hammer with the trigger. You have to carry the pistol with the trigger cocked and the safety on. It's got an ambidextrous safety. It's available on the right and left side of the frame. Most people buying pistols for self-defense today are getting a polymer frame gun because they're lighter to carry. They're getting Glocks and Smith & Wesson M&Ps and the XD. The polymer frame guns usually don't have an extra safety. The safety is built into the trigger, so it's considered a firearm that's quicker to bring into action and lighter to carry. That's why they're so popular. This high power does have an extreme collector value. It's very popular with lovers of the 1911 and high powers. There's a police in the states that used to carry these, and they carried them cocked and locked. They didn't have any problems with it. They were, as long as you're well trained with carrying a safety on frame pistol, you'll be fine. But for beginners, they usually prefer to go to Glocks and Springfield XDs and the Smith & Wesson M&Ps. So when I got this, I heard rumors that if you take the magazine disconnect out, it could really grate in the trigger pull. This pistol cannot fire when the magazine is removed. So some people say that that feature is what makes the trigger harsher. So this is what the trigger looks like. It's quite narrow, so it exerts more pressure on your finger. Plus this plunger here rides against the magazine, so this has to be pushed in for the trigger to actuate. So I bought a replacement trigger from Brownells. I don't know if you can see it here, but the replacement trigger is much wider. It gives a much easier feel on the finger as it distributes the weight evenly across your finger. The trigger doesn't have a magazine safety, so I installed that, and I also installed a lighter hammer spring, a 26-pound hammer spring. It did not change the trigger at all. So I was still at 8 pounds plus on the trigger. Not very happy about that. If you ever want to take your high power apart, I recommend getting Stephen Camp's Disassembly Instructions. It's laminated paper, so you could get oil and gunk and solvent on it. It won't hurt anything. And there's very good illustrations about how to take your high power apart. And if you do, a handy tool, the hammer spring is wound around a stem. It's good to keep a fork in your high power toolbox. It compresses this coil spring so you can get this pin out and then twist this nut off of the stem. It's pretty easy to take the high power apart for someone who's not a gunsmith, as long as you have this with you. Unfortunately, Mr. Camp passed away, and fortunately for us, his wife is still running his website and selling these instruction manuals. I highly recommend getting this. Mr. Camp was a lawman who happened to carry a high power, and he became quite an expert on it. He was an expert pistol shot, and he was also expert at working on high powers as well. You'll see high powers referred to as Browning high powers or FN high powers. Even though John Browning designed the high power, he never manufactured them. He had the FN plant in Herstal, Belgium, manufacture the high powers. So whenever you see a Browning high power, it's just a high power on which the FN plant stamped the Browning name, and the Browning company was marketing them in the United States. But FNs are also sold by the FN plant as FN high powers, and they were marketing them to countries around the world. There were probably over 1 million of these produced, and that's since 1935 is when it was first adopted, and they're still being made today. And I don't know how many countries have adopted them, but they were used in a lot of countries. So this is not the type of action work that you can do on your own. It's difficult. It's easy to take a Glock apart and work on it, and I'll do another video in the future on that. But working on this trigger, it's like a Rube Goldberg affair. Let's see if I could show you how okay, the field strip, the high power, pull the slide all the way back and let the slide rest in the safety notch, the second safety notch. That would be the first safety notch right here. Let it rest in the second safety notch. That would be holding the slide open. Turn the pistol around, and while you're pushing out on the slide stop, pull up on the rear of the slide stop as well. So you're pulling up here and pushing out there, and the slide stop will pull out, but make sure you hold pressure on the slide because the recoil spring is putting pressure on the slide to snap it. Sorry about that, the battery power ran out. Got a new battery now. So make sure you're holding back on the slide so the slide doesn't slide out to the left because the recoil spring is putting tension on it. And now you can pull out the slide stop, and then if you let off on the safety, the slide will come all the way forward. Just make sure you keep some pressure on it so it doesn't go flying across the room. This is the recoil spring. So the way the action works is when you pull on the trigger, this little lever comes up towards the slide. So this will fire without the magazine in the frame because the magazine disconnect has been removed to make the trigger lighter. So that pin interacts with the sear lever. The sear lever is in this lower groove here, and it's kind of like a well, it's just a lever. It's got a pin in the middle as a fulcrum, so when it pushes up on the sear lever, the bottom of the sear lever will come down and it'll contact the sear, which is right here. That's the sear, and the sear will release the hammer. And that is why it's difficult to get a light, crisp trigger pull on high power. It's a Rube Goldberg type of affair where the trigger pull is going outside the door around the corner and then back in the house through the other door. It's just a circuitous route, and the lightest, crisper triggers have the shortest lock time and have an easier pull when there's a short distance to travel, and that's just not happening in this design. It just happens to be character of the design. I did get some replacement grips for this. I've got them around here somewhere. Where are my grips? There they are. Got some replacement grips at Brownells. Take a look at these. These are wood rather than plastic. I think that's going to look pretty nice on it. So I'm going to put those on today. And then take it to the range for some testing. Okay, here she is with the new grips. Does it make a big difference? I think it's nice. By the way, I forgot to mention, if you guys are going to do your own work on your high powers, this pin right here is a trigger pin. Some guys are reporting they're able to knock it out with a pin and a punch. I tried it, and this thing is really in there tight. It's a real tight fit, and I don't want to have a punch slip off the pin and ruin the frame, so I used a hydraulic press. So I had a pin, I had a socket that I ground down. It's one of those sockets that has a star Torx bit. So I took the smallest Torx bit and I ground it down to fit the size of this pin, and I used that Torx socket on the ram of my hydraulic press, and I was able to successfully drive this pin out. And this pin is a one-way pin. The diameter is larger on the left side than the right side, so it has to be driven out from the right side to the left side, and when you put it back in, you press it back in from the left side to the right side. So that's a very critical thing about the high power frame. Anytime you're working on any pistol, make sure you're using screwdrivers that fit the head of your screws exactly, or you're going to bugger up your screws. Anyway, that's going to be it until I get her to the range. Thanks. Some of you guys have been asking me what parts I'm using, so these are Philippine mahogany grips from Brownells. Part number 647-035-004. The wide combat trigger for the high power I got from Cylinder and Slide, part number CS0037.